Hey there guys, SD here. This is the second time I'm recording this video because the first time GeForce Experience was using a different microphone input. Oh well. So this video will be about the two node groups I'm releasing, the Injustice and MK11 CPT or color palette node groups. Basically, what it does, if you haven't paid attention to my Twitter, is that it automatically applies the colors to the respective texture. So over here is Scorpion, right? His color texture goes over here, ID goes right here, and tone goes right here. Now the ID, you want to make sure it's using the closest interpolation, so there's no aliasing or smoothing, whatever, on the textures. Well, just a mask really. It kind of how do I say this, messes up the transition here. You want them to be like this. If you set it to linear, it looks like this. It's very it just looks bad. Okay, that's all I'm saying. Just closest. This is better. This is what you want. Alright, and it's basically the same idea across everywhere else. If you do the same thing with the gears, and you're gonna have an RMA texture, roughness, smoothness, ambient occlusion. Although, if you see my workflow, MK11 doesn't do it that way. I think it's just the metallus and the emission that go in here. So you link that texture here in the over here, right? And basically what that is, it controls the emission because the emission color has to be synced as well. You just put that for whatever you're using. If it's the gear, you use this one. If it's the regular emission, it's this one. And you can control the strength over here. You just connect that to the in the principal shader, the emission strength input. Alright. The skin and hair color are using the same parts of the palette texture. Difference is the hair color is done a tiny bit differently compared to the skin color. There's no difference in how it's calculated, it's just the output that's different. And over here, there's this little optional node group here. It's called tone blur. Basically what it does is that it blurs out the transition between the tone textures, because calculating this doesn't calculate any sort of like filtering or whatever, so the transitions are very sharp. You don't need to use this every time. You don't have to use this like for most characters. It's mostly a problem with the newer characters for some, no, not the newer skins, because I'm not sure what NRS did, but basically there's like way too much of a fade between each point that it calculates. I'm looking for a good area here that basically shows what I mean. Like, let's say on Scorpion's pants, let's get a better angle. Right here, right? There's all this stuff going on. If I were to set it to closest, you'd see it better. Actually, kind of. Not entirely. But yeah, right here is like this sort of like weird transition here. It doesn't fade in correctly. You're not gonna really notice this too much if you put it on an actual character. But basically, you want to connect this thing to this little purple area here, and basically blurs the transition lines so the fade doesn't look as crispy, I guess is one way to say it. This affects everything, by the way. So only use it for like really bad results for the first time around. Don't always use this. This is just for cleaning up the artifacts. Alright, that's basically it for the Injustice version. Now let's look at a character that uses, did I say Injustice? I meant to say MK11. Now let's look at a character that uses that. This is Skarlet right here. She is the only character I've set up with the latest version so far. I've set up other characters, but they use an earlier version of the node group. The latest version is a lot more optimized and clean. So every material here on her, skin, whatever, uses one single node group. As you can see, there's number 4. That's 4 users. So that's this material for her skin. There's this one for the gear. Then there's the other gear set. And then there's the hair right here. Alright. So over here, right, there's some emission going on the blade. That's because I connected the RMA right here, over here. And since it's the gear texture, I select that gear emission and put that all the way down here along with the emission strength down here. And if I wanted to control it, I just use this. Alright. And I forgot to show one thing, but you can adjust the brightness for the skins themselves. You only adjust the skin textures that are colored in. Whatever isn't colored will not be adjusted. It will stay there at default brightness. That's controlled by the ID, by the way, so like if you were to raise the brightness of this texture, not from here, but like from over here, you would affect other things as well. So let's see. What did I want to show off? Right. So if you were to do this a bit differently, like let's say you didn't want everything to sync up, you wanted every different material to use a different part, right? Don't click this. What you want to do is append another node group. You'll basically have a duplicate of it, because over here, if you want to change the CPT, right, you go image, replace. And let's say I want to select a different skin. Skarlet skin is CPT 3. So let's go to CPT 3, number 5. It's basically the inverted color. Let's do the same thing for the others. Let's go number 7, CPT 3. Right? And that's basically how you change the palettes. Like, if I wanted for, if I wanted the hair, for example, to use a different palette, what I would do is append from here, right? Append the same node group, so it comes in with a different palette set. And I just want to show off one thing. You don't have to like stick to the base character palettes. You can go at like Kotal Khan, for example, and get this really cool effect with Skarlet's hair. Let me just disable animated occlusion real quick. And yeah, we just enable lighting. And yeah, this looks pretty nice. If I were to go and do the other textures, CPT 0 is the base palette, so let me go to 04. Get this very orange greenish look. That's controlled from this area right here, the top area. This gear goes on the bottom down here. That's where all the emission goes. It's also down here. The skin is in the top row, gear is in the bottom row. I explained this in my workflow video, but in case you didn't get it the first time, I'm telling you now. Let's look at Frost, for example. It's a base skin. There's Frost Skarlet. It looks pretty nice. She's got blue hair now. It's pretty alright. So yeah, you're not really restricted on what you can and can't, use, and everything should just work just fine. The only thing I worry about is how the palettes transition into each color. Some are more drastic than others. You might want to pay attention to that, because then you end up with this issue here where you're gonna have to use the tone blur node group. So you don't see these like artifacts here and everything. It's not something I can really get rid of, by the way. It's just like that. Okay, now let's look at the Injustice version. The file you'll get is basically the same deal. The color goes here. Only difference is you got less things to put on here. And Injustice has this one texture for everything, so here's the ID and the tone in this one texture. The ID is the base color and the tone is the alpha. And if you want to do the same thing from tone, what you want to do actually is just duplicate this and then connect this into the alpha, then use that instead. You don't want the ID to be blurred as well because it's going to mess up all the calculations here. You don't want that. It's basically the same deal, right? There's nothing really different when Injustice and MK11 uses the same system, so there's not much to change. Only difference is there's no gear area, because the way the way Injustice does it, sorry if I keep on doing that by the way, is the palettes are basically two different sets. This is a starter set, right? So if I were to flip it over here, image, flip, vertically, save as SU, starter CBT, let's call it alt. And now we have the alternate color. That's basically how Injustice does their palettes. They're just flipped alternates. You know, there's the regular palette and then there's the flipped palette. So here's this one right here. It's nice pimpin' palette right here. You got the alternate that's flipped with the same texture, and that's really it. Let's look at how this works on the actual character. I got Batman set up right here. I'm hoping I can show you this one bug if it loads up the way I want it to. It's probably not, but we'll see. But yeah, the more of these you have, the longer it takes for the shaders to compile. Anyways, here's Batman. So, I'm not sure if you noticed, but there's this weird bug going on. Why does the emission end over here? Well, it's not just the emission, it's the whole thing, actually. If you go into Cape, this is like line right here. For some reason, when you have these like node groups that use the UVs, I think, or generated texture coordinates, whatever, it doesn't update it per pose, right? So, quick fix for that. So you just go on the skeleton or whatever. Just flip between rest position and pose position. It should just be fine. When you render it out, it will fix itself too. It won't look the way it does in the viewport. I'm not sure why it's like that, but that's just a viewport bug specifically. It's not an issue with the node group itself. I'm not sure why the Eevee doesn't update it like that correctly. Anyways, besides that, you know, once again, same deal. Let's replace, and you can mess with all the palettes you ever wanted. Change the emission colors too. Yeah, I forgot to mention the emission, right? So the emission channel for Injustice is in the alpha channel of the normal map. You connect the alpha over here, norm alpha, and that controls the emission. Basically, it's the same thing as MK11, not that different. And yeah, that's really it. Honestly, nothing really interesting to talk about there. Oh, one thing actually. So for a couple characters, you might need to use the whole blur thing. You might not have to. You might have to. It depends on the texture, honestly. Most of the time, you're not gonna have to, but like this area, for example, I think I have to clean up. I know in a couple other areas, because the Injustice one is still like kind of work in progress, but in a couple other areas, like over here, for example, the colors transition into this weird blue over here, even though that's not going on here at all. One of the masks are invading, basically. And I gotta clean that up. It's an easy fix, and I'll show you just a couple seconds. All right. I'm going to show you how the shader works. Let's go back into the MK11 setup. Or was it? It was this one, right? Alright, so here's your node group. If you were to go and press tab, you'd see this, right? This is the skin portion. This is the gear portion. Injustice 2 only has this area minus this little area down by the bottom for the hair. So for the ID, it basically looks like a texture that has a bunch of flat colors. Those flat colors are all masks. These masks are specified by a specific range. Each range is calculated with these values in the ID calculator. And all these values over here basically select which color to use each to use from each mask or range, whatever you want to call it. Color 03 is basically a failsafe because there was this one value that wasn't playing well, and this was the only way to fix it, honestly. I never understood why it didn't work correctly the first time or the other time that I worked on this, but it works fine this way. If you want to adjust it and like see which mask, you know, goes where, understand that it's a staircase in this instance. So if you want to adjust this thing, you have to adjust this, and then adjust this, and then, you know, yada yada yada. If you're gonna adjust the stuff from the bottom down here, it's going to affect everything else and all that. It's basically a threshold. This value cannot go up a certain amount. And that's really it. And it's basically the same setup over here in the CBT range. You see all these mapping nodes in the CBTs, which is why you can't just like, you know, get an image texture outside the node group, just put a palette here. No, you can't do that because I need all these mapping nodes. I'm not sure why it doesn't work that way. I'm not sure why the Blender devs thought it was a good idea to not have like separate inputs for mapping. Like, let's say I just wanted to have the input for the textures instead of just like having to put them right over here. Like, I got a texture right here, and I got this like, I don't know, node that controls other things for the texture, rather than have to like duplicate it and have all these individual textures over here. I'm not sure if you noticed, but if you go in the palette there, the whole thing is used basically 482 times. Not fun. Anyways, after that, there's the tone calculator. Tone range is what I called it. It's basically the same thing as the ID calculator. Difference is the values are different. They control the colors that transition from over here using the tone. So it goes from 1 to 16. So there's 16 colors and all that transitions into. Uses the same. No, actually, there's no failsafe. If I'm correct, it just skips from 2 to 4. I did not notice that, but yeah, that's really it. Color 0 is its own thing, and then after that, it just skips from color 3 because on the ID, it uses this black channel. Those parts aren't touched by the colors, but over here that's not necessary, so there's no failsafe. And that's really it. Honestly, there's not much to really show off, but you know, if there's one thing to notice is that the majority of this node group is mixed RGB nodes, and that's a problem. Why is that a problem? Because Cycles does not like that at all, and I'm going to show you why. If you were to over here, toggle the system console, nothing's going on, right? Go into Cycles, enable open shading language. After I show you this, go into the render mode, and look at this. Out of SVM stack space shader, MK11 CPT example too big, and I found out it's like this because the mixed RGB nodes are just way too much. There's too many. Because I tested this before, if I delete like the majority of them, it would be fine, but there's just way too many, and I can't move them because the shader works just like this. There is no way to do this shader without all the mixed RGB nodes. It's not fair, man. Anyways, if you want it to work, you got to enable OSL or open shading language, and just give it a second. You know, OSL is a lot slower. You notice that the textures are a lot darker than how you look in the viewport, because for some reason, compared to Cycles, OSL doesn't pay attention to the image properties. So even though it's this channel pack, it doesn't want an alpha there. So what I usually do is just go over here, go to the color, and press N, image properties, select none for the alpha, save as no alpha. You see, I already did that before. Save image. After it saves, give it a couple seconds and it'll update over here. It'll go back to normal. There you go. And that works just fine as is. It's the same thing for the Injustice 2 shader. You just remove the base color alpha and it'll be fine. You don't have to remove the alpha from the ID. At least I'm pretty sure. Don't quote me on that. And basically from here you just bake your textures instead, because you can't use it in like normal cycles. So if you got GPU rendering, doesn't work. If you got CPU rendering, doesn't work. Only works in OSL mode. You just bake out the textures, and then after that you can use them in cycles just fine. I had to do that, for other characters, because I know a lot of people are going to use this to bake textures, and this is the only way to bake them. Alright, and I think that's all I have to cover. No, okay. I actually have to cover a couple more things. This node group is still very work in progress. Even though it works best for MK11 models. The Injustice version is still kind of needs some adjustments here and there. Although it mostly works, there's no problems there really. It works as it's supposed to, because it's the same system as MK11. Only difference is both tone and ID ranges are slightly different. I just have to adjust those. I'm not going to adjust those like on release, because I'm not really interested in working on this as much. I'll get into why by the end of the video. But another thing, this shader, node group, shader, whatever, is very intense on performance. If I were to go on Task Manager and go into performance, check out the GPU performance, right? It's on 8% right now. If I go over here and just look at the texture real quick, boost is up from 8% to 22. That's not as extreme because it's on a plane, right? If I were to go back to Batman or Skarlet, doesn't really matter who. Don't save. No, other than the fact that, of course, GPU stuff will increase, but right now it's once again on 8%. If I were to go over here, just on the body itself, where the CPT is being used, it rises up if I just continuously move it and I just get closer. It's on 50%. Let me go over here by the other gear pieces. It's on 70 now. Let me zoom out and move around. It's on 30, even though I've only just gotten farther. Get closer, move around a bit. All that utilization just increases by a lot. But it's not using more GPU memory, it's just using more GPU power. When I was still using the GTX 960 I had before, performance on this thing was so bad that it was just so hard to work on it. But now that I have a 3080 Ti, there's no issues there. Another thing, since this texture, group, shader, whatever, setup, is so complex and expensive, if you were to just try to adjust it whenever, it would be very Blender freezes up for a second because it's trying to compile the shader. As you can see, it's just taking a couple. It's not fun, honestly. So what I usually do to fix that is, let me just wait for this to load, Jesus Christ, is that I usually just remove this view. You don't want the preview showing up anywhere, so I just go over here and it's a solid mode and do all my stuff that way so it doesn't recompile, because if I go back into the material view, this will be just fine, of course. But if I were to do the same thing over here with the skin, remove the color, it takes a while longer to recompile. And then it freezes for a second, connect this back again. It should work just fine afterwards, but if you keep on doing that over and over, if you got new materials and you keep on doing that, it takes a long time to load. The Batman setup, if your specs aren't the best, it will take longer, etc., etc. And that's really it. Honestly, there's not much to talk about. Just understand that if you want to change the palettes, you go onto the palette that's supplied in the image editor and just image replace. Do not load a new one, because it's not going to work that way. You have to replace the palette and rename it, and it'll work just fine. If you want to do separated palettes, then you have to append the palette from the file itself, and you got a new palette right there. So let me actually show this off. Append MK11 CPT v1.9 no tree, and MK11 CPT input v1.9. Alright, so now we have another one. If we want to just go CPTs right there, right? Let's say for some reason I wanted Skarlet's hair to be Kodokans or Scorpions, whatever. I would select the hair material, right? And then go into the other one. That's on 0 right now. And there you go. Now I got a separated part. If I go into Skull CPT, let's change that to Kodokans real quick, because that actually has some color on it. Now the hair is its own color palette. I could do that for everything else if I wanted to, but I'm not going to do that in this video. I just want to provide that you don't need to necessarily have everything sync up. You can just do whatever you want, honestly. And that's where I'm going to stop this. There's nothing really to show off afterwards. And yeah, that was all I wanted to show off. Have fun using this node group. I've been working on it for a while, and the only reason I'm releasing this is because my life isn't really, how do I say this, isn't really, it isn't really fun to do anything, and really, most of the time I'm constantly like sad or disappointed and all that. And honestly, even though I like to stick to my hobbies are mostly a distraction from all the problems I have to deal with on the outside. So I'm trying to, how do I say this, just give away what I'm not going to be working on for as much as usual. So like this node group, I'm not really interested in doing too many updates on it anymore. The entire time I've had it for like months now. It's just like reworking it, making it more accurate and all that. I'm not sure if you noticed I got a sore throat, I'm sorry. And it's basically at a very satisfactory level. There's nothing I really have to change about it. It just works now. There's no issues, there's no inaccurate colors. I figured out the setup for both Injustice and MK11, so this shouldn't be bad. The only problem is performance, but other than that, people tell me that my stuff always looks good, looks very accurate to the game and whatever. I'm kind of proud of that, but most of the time I'm not really proud of most of the things I work on. They're not really things that I congratulate myself over too much. Even though I spend a lot of time on them, that's really it. I just spend a lot of time on these things. I'm never really satisfied with my results. Sometimes I just like drop posters and just work on something else, maybe pick it up again, repurpose it, and just like make something completely different. That's something I do sometimes, but I'm not really happy about doing that. It's just, I couldn't execute the idea I originally wanted to do, so I just changed it out completely. Because most of the time I'm limited by like general skill, and people always say that I seem to have some sort of like talent or skill, but really I don't. Honestly, I'm telling the truth on that. Because the way I see it, if I had actual talent or skill, I'd be able to do like way more interesting things, but not really. I'm just a college student with a very, very cynical view on life, and really, I'm not really too proud of these things, even though I spend a lot of time on them. It's just, renders are renders, anybody can make them within the time given. I'm more or less just a guide now, if anything. So I'm just releasing what I have worked on, so people understand why I've slowed down. It's because, well, life has become more problematic for me over time, and I'm just not entirely in the best state to be continuously working on certain hobbies, not because I don't want to, just because I'm not feeling too great in general. So over the years, I've been going downhill, and I just want to appease those who question, oh, what's going on with SD. This is nothing much. I'm just not interested anymore with, doing these things for as long as I have. I'm not saying I'm done, I'll be posting stuff, once in a while, just not just like a lot of stuff. As far as, these renders go, I enjoy making them. They're a good distraction from all the problems I have to deal with, but, I can't really be doing that to concentrate on other things that are, I guess, way more important in your life, like whatever you got majoring in college, even though you're not too confident, and it's just, what can you do, right? You just gotta pass those classes, and after that, get your degree, get yourself a nice job, live a life that you wish to, intend to live, whatever, really. I'm not too sure where I'm going after. And, if you listen to what I just said, thanks for listening, but, I'm done here. I'm probably going to be releasing more of my setups, like the wrinkle map setup and the, micro input setup, and that'll probably be it. On the topic of micro inputs, some character models like Skarlet's Russian influence skin, I forgot what it's called specifically, Sonya's young skin from the story mode, they have these little micro textures that basically affect how they're colored a bit. You can't do that with the regular ID and tone textures. You have to do that with the micro textures. I'm not sure if you can notice, but this model has a couple of micros, specular light, and you can see them. It's mostly just leather. There's a couple of micro textures that are used for colors and diffuse color. You can't really see it too well unless I go a little closer, but that's really it. That's, if you ever get concerned why certain things don't look as exact, it's mostly just because you're missing micros. Mostly. Anyways, here's where I head off. SD out.